Good morning. I hope you miss me as much as I miss you. As you can see, we are not at school and I do not have my lab. So, welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to talk about solutions. I don't mean solutions to our problems, I mean solutions in the scientific way. Now, first of all, it's important that you look at the vocabulary that I gave you at the top so that you understand what we're talking about. I'm going to put the video a little bit closer so that you can see clearly what we're doing, so that you can really pay attention. I hope that you are doing this with me as we go along. We are going to start with ordinary tap water. Now this tap water I'm going to use as my solvent. A solvent is something that you use. It's usually a liquid, and it is also something that you put other stuff into and dissolve it. It seems like the particles that you add to a solvent magically disappears, although that is not the truth. Let's have a look. For today, I'm going to use salt as my solute. Now, the solute is something that you add to a solvent to make a solution. We're going to see how that works. I used salt because I know you might have salt in your kitchen. And seeing that we cannot go out to the shops and buy things, that is the best thing to use. Good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add some salt, which is our solute, to our solvent, which is our water. And I'm going to stir it until I cannot see any more salt at the bottom. You might want to use some of your own substances to experiment with to see which ones will dissolve, like curry powder or even coffee powder, sugar, and check the solubility of the solute that you select. There you can see there's no more salt at the bottom, just stirring it very well. And there I've changed our solute into a solution. Now remember, we've got our solute dissolved into our solvent. Okay, so our solvent is diluted into this water. It dissolved. Good, we're going to use this one later, so do not throw it out yet. Good, I'm just going to put it aside so that we can have a look later. Now we're going to use our marbles. Now, if you use pebbles or you use stones, you do it very much in the same fashion. But if you add it into your glass, remember, glass is very brittle and it can break and it is sharp. So that's one of our safety measures that we have to consider. We do not work without an adult knowing what we're doing and without permission using the equipment that you are going to experiment with. Also, when you make solvents, do not taste your solvents unless you know it is safe and that is something that you usually or normally eat. We add marbles until our glass is full. How do we know it is full? As soon as we cannot add any more marbles to our glass. Now, if you look carefully, you will see that inside, in between the marbles, there are spaces, there are openings. So, do you think our glass is really full? Let's have a look. I can add something that's smaller than the marbles. Remember, these particles are rather big, so they take up a lot of space. But for this purpose, just because it's fun, I decided to add gold flakes. Now, as you can see, the gold flakes are much smaller than the marbles, but they can fit into those spaces. You can shake it a little and you can actually see how it fills up those spaces. I might not have enough gold flakes. I use this for a specific reason. You will discover later why. You don't have to use that. You can just use your sand. Good. Now you can see there's still more openings, and I'm going to fill that with sand. You will discover why. It might be messy, so maybe it's a good idea to work on a tray, which is easier to clean, or just work very, very carefully so that you do not make too big of a mess. Okay, now you can see it looks like those particles are all distributed well and that there are no more air in between. So all our spaces are filled, but check very carefully. If there's still spaces, just add more sand. Just going to break this up to make it into a finer powder so that it can go into the spaces easily. You might want to shake the glass a little bit more to make sure that you can't see any openings in between. And there you can see, I see some more openings there. I'm going to keep adding until there are no more openings in between the marbles. Then I know that the glass now is really full. It has filled all the openings and our glass is full. It seems like there is no more space. Let's have a look. Do you think I can add anything else to this mixture over here to fill the glass even more? Let's have a look what we can do. I'm going to use the solution for this purpose now. So let's have a look. I am going to very carefully pour the water into this mixture. Look carefully what happens. Be patient when you do this because this might take some time. If you look carefully at what's happening now, you will see that the sand gets wet. The reason for that is the water particles are much smaller than the sand particles. So what happens is the water particles are moving in between the sand particles. You can even hear the bubbles pop because the air rises to the top and the water is replacing the spaces where the air was trapped. Keep adding some of your solution until you can see that it does not go through anymore. Then you know that you have covered all the openings, all the spaces. There you can see that the water is even taking some of the sand particles down to the bottom. You'll discover why later. Good. Now keep your solution because we're going to use that again. Now, I want to separate this mixture. Remember, that is a solution, this is a mixture. The difference between a solution and a mixture is that with a mixture, you can still see all the particles, all the different substances that you mixed. With a solution, you cannot really see or feel, if you touch it, you cannot really feel the salt particles. But if you look at this mixture, you can feel all the different particles that's in there. I'm going to try and separate this now. Watch carefully what happens. Got most of that out. Just going to try and get some of these gold flakes out as well. And there I have a lovely mixture going. Right, so I'm going to show you now how to separate this mixture. First of all, we're going to use hand sorting. Now, hand sorting is just what it says. You sort it by hand. So we can take out the bigger particles, which is our marbles. bottom of the bowl, you might feel a muddy substance. Now that is the sand particles that settle to the bottom. That's another way of separating mixtures, is by settling. You let it stand and the heavy particles will go down to the bottom, which is settling. And we're going to see more about that just now. You can see that the gold flakes are sticking to the marbles, so the marbles are not clean. We will see how to separate that a bit later. Almost have all of them out. A few more. I think I've got them all. Good. Now, that is still a mixture. We have taken out most of the bigger particles, but remember what is mixed with this now? You can still see some gold flakes sticking to the marbles. That is easily separated, and we will try that maybe later. In this bowl, I now have the muddy mixture mixed with a solution, gold flakes, and sand. How can I separate that? Watch carefully what we are doing. Decanting is one of the ways. Decanting is where you carefully pour the liquid or the top liquid that's floating off very carefully, and the heavier particles will stay behind. There you can see we've got our mud and we've got our gold flakes. All right, now that is called settling. Now the gold flakes, if you look carefully at this glass, you can see that they tend to float. Now that's easily separated. For that purpose, I'm going to use a very old sieve, and this method we call sieving. Watch carefully. It catches the bigger particles and it lets the smaller particles go through. That's another method of separating mixtures, is sieving. There you can see the gold particles stay behind. So I know what you're guessing at this moment. You know that this is how we're going to separate this mixture. Good. Now, here we have our muddy water. This is not a solution. Remember, sand is not soluble in water. It looks that way because the water is still brown, but it's because there are very fine particles that is suspended within the water, but it's not a mixture like this. Good. Remember, a mixture is not a solution. Let's have a look. To prove that to you, I am going to pour this mixture of sand and our solution through a filter paper. That's another method of separating mixtures. If I take a clean glass, I'm just using wet wipes for this purpose. So I'm going to pour this mixture through the filter paper and see what happens. Good. Now, in the filter paper, you can clearly see what I've got left. There I have some very fine particles of gold flakes that were still suspended within this mixture. And I also have very fine sand particles that I caught in this filter paper. The reason for that is the smaller particles ran through, and that is why this water is still rather murky and even muddy, because the sand particles that went through is smaller than the holes in this filter paper, and that's why they still went through. Good. Now, if I want to separate this solution, look carefully what happens. I'm I'm going to take a clean filter paper and I'm now going to try and separate the salt from the water by filtering. Watch carefully. When you do this, you will notice that the water runs through quite quickly. Remember, it is a solution, not a mixture. Now, if we look carefully at the filter paper, we will notice no salt particles are left behind. Because it is not a mixture, it is a solution. You can even taste this water and it will still taste salty because the salt is still in that water. The only way that we can now separate the salt from the water is by a method we call evaporation. Now, evaporation you've done before. You pour this into a saucer or a very shallow bowl and you leave it out in a hot place or in the sun. The water will evaporate and what will stay behind is the salt crystals. That we also call crystallization, where the crystals stay behind and the water has evaporated. You can also do it with this mixture and see what happens. See if you can see when the water has evaporated that you have different sand particles as well as salt crystals, because remember, the salt stays behind. That will be interesting for you to observe. Good. Now we have another problem. Remember this? How are we going to separate this mixture? Let's have a good look. Easy way to do that is take a bowl of clear water and we pour our marbles in there. Can you see what's happening? Most of the gold flakes are floating at the top. Easy way to do that is we can scoop them up with our sieve, or we can filter it this way. Remember now what will happen? The gold flakes will stay in the sieve. This method we call sieving. And there we have some gold flakes. Now I can either scoop up the gold flakes from the top, or I can do exactly what I've done now by taking more water, adding it to this, or pouring this mixture now also through a sieve. Let's see if decanting will work. If you look at this mixture now, let's have a look. Can you see that decanting is not working? So sieving will be our preferred method. But look very carefully at this glass now. Can you see that we've got muddy water at the bottom and our gold flakes are still floating? So we can take a filter paper and we can filter this. What do you think will happen? Let's have a look. Observe at the bottom of the filter paper what is happening there. And what do we have there? Some more fine sand particles, and there we have all our gold flakes taken out of the water. Good. The last thing I want to show you is that we can take this now and leave it overnight. If you look carefully, you might notice that the top soil, the top water, is much lighter than the bottom. That is because the sand particles that's still suspended in this water goes to the bottom. Can you remember what that is called? Remember, if the sand particles separate from the water particles and it goes to the bottom, it makes sediment. Now, because of that, sometimes we think that the dams are full of water. While in truth, as a matter of fact, often the mud goes to the bottom and it looks like the water is filling the dam. Meantime, we've got all the sediment at the bottom and only the top part is the water that we have. That's why we run out of water in South Africa, and we often find that our dams are clogged with mud. Good. Remember, not all solutions can be separated. Not by hand sorting or any of these methods. We use evaporation for that purpose. I want to show you something else. We can use solids. Remember, we used salt as our solute, which is a solid. We can touch it, we can pick it up by hand. But we can also use liquids to dissolve into liquids. Good, let's have a look. Not all liquids will work this way, but let's have a look. I used ordinary cooking oil and I added to this glass. Good, watch carefully what happens. I'm going to stir this and try and mix the oil with the water particles. Now with oil is a liquid and the water is a liquid. But if you look carefully, the particles separate on its own. Good. A method to separate this oil from this water now is a method that we've already used, and it's called decanting. Now to do this, you have to do it very gently and very carefully. You can see it separates by itself. Now to get most of the oil off, we use decanting. Decanting is where we very gradually and very carefully try and pour the water that floats on top off, and you will see it's not the water, it's the oil that floats on top. Even in the bowl you can see that the oil floats on top, and we can decant it again and again until we have most of the water separated from the oil. It's time for me to say goodbye. Have fun, be safe, see you soon. Thank you.